Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Samara White. I'm a pharmacy resident here at Buffalo Psychiatric Center. Today we're going to be talking about anxiety and anxiety disorders. We're going to discuss the difference between anxiety as an emotion and anxiety as a disorder. We'll discuss the different types of anxiety disorders and what can help with anxiety, including medication and some other things. We'll start with defining anxiety. Experiencing anxiety is a normal and healthy response to unknown, dangerous, or potentially threatening situations or events, or even environments where you feel extremely vulnerable. However, having anxiety when it's not justified by any real events or real danger, and if anxiety gets in the way of you living your life the way you want to, this may be categorized as an anxiety disorder, especially if the symptoms become too overwhelming for you to handle. So how do you know if you're experiencing anxiety? Here are some symptoms. For mental symptoms, there's worrying and fear, nervousness, panic or panic attacks, being irritable, tense, or restless, having trouble concentrating or feeling like your mind's going blank, having a hard time making decisions, or having a general sense of doom. Here are some physical symptoms of anxiety: trembling and shaking, having a fast heartbeat, crying, sweating, having chills or hot flashes, having trouble speaking, having an upset stomach or nausea, being short of breath, having chest pain, or experiencing insomnia or fatigue. But remember that just experiencing these symptoms does not mean that you have an anxiety disorder. You might just be feeling the emotional response of anxiety. In an anxiety disorder, these symptoms would be excessive, overwhelming, and would likely interfere with your day-to-day life. There are many different types of anxiety disorders. We're mainly going to focus on generalized anxiety disorder today, but there's social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, separation anxiety, specific phobias, agoraphobia, and obsessive compulsive disorder, which is technically not categorized under anxiety anymore, but it's still related. Let's watch a video to summarize the differences between these different types.
Do you find yourself feeling stressed out when you're studying for an important exam or when you're practicing repeatedly in front of a mirror before a presentation? It's perfectly normal to feel stressed out or anxious every now and then. Unfortunately, for some of us, our anxiety can get so out of hand that we feel this way constantly. That chronic feeling of anxiousness and fear is the marking of an anxiety disorder. Before we begin, we'd like to make a short disclaimer. Please don't use this video to self-diagnose. If you can relate to most of the signs, we do advise you to go to a qualified mental health professional for proper diagnosis. With that being said, Psych2Go presents to you the 7 types of anxiety disorders. 1. Generalized anxiety disorder, also known as GAD. It's the most common among anxiety disorders to be diagnosed. People with GAD suffer from intense and persistent worry. A GAD sufferer can worry or feel anxious about a number of events, ranging from school or work to their family life at home. This anxiety is associated with at least 3 of these symptoms: restlessness, fatigue, difficulty concentrating, irritability, muscle tension, insomnia, or difficulty falling asleep. People with GAD often can't explain their anxiety using specific fears, like those with more specific anxiety disorders can. This is because their anxiety stems from various stimuli. Those who suffer from GAD can find relief in a number of treatment options, ranging from mindfulness meditation and brisk exercise to cognitive behavioral therapies and medications. 2. Separation anxiety disorder. This type of anxiety is more common in children than adults. For many, the mere thought of separation causes a high amount of stress. People with separation anxiety worry that something unexpected could separate them from their attachment figure, or that their attachment figure will abandon them. This anxiety presents as nightmares of being alone and a persistent refusal to leave their attachment figure. Kids with separation anxiety may be clingy and insist on sleeping with their parents at night. Children often grow out of separation anxiety disorder, but if it persists for 6 months or longer, they should be provided help. Adult sufferers might also find benefit from the available therapies. 3. Social anxiety disorder, social phobia, and selective mutism. Social anxiety disorder, also known as SAD, refers to the fear of public situations and exposure to unfamiliar people. SAD sufferers tend to avoid situations in which they're in the spotlight because they're worried that they'll be embarrassed or judged by others. The thought or the anticipation alone of an upcoming social situation can cause major anxiety-related symptoms like panic attacks or severe stomach pain. People with SAD may show signs of stress in these forms: little to no eye contact, freezing in place, running off, or avoiding tasks like eating in public. Children and adults alike can suffer from SAD, but some children with social anxiety may also have a more intense inability to function in social situations. Selective mutism is a type of social anxiety in which a child is unable to speak in social situations, despite being able to speak normally otherwise. Oftentimes, this problem arises at school or in the presence of strangers. If a child with selective mutism is able to communicate at all, they might only be able to nod or whisper. 4. Panic disorder. It becomes a disorder when an individual experiences panic attacks multiple times in their lifetime. Panic attacks are intense bursts of fear followed by a range of physical symptoms. These include at least 4 of the following: cold sweats, muscle stiffness or trembling, hyperventilation, which is fast, shallow breathing, lightheadedness, numbness, or the fear of death and or insanity. The fear afterward of another panic attack sometimes actually provokes more panic attacks. More often than not, panic attacks are had in combination with other anxiety disorders. Therapy, along with medications, can help in handling panic disorder. 5. Agoraphobia. Does your local train station seem intimidating? Do you feel faint in a crowded place? Agoraphobia is the fear of public places. Anxiety arises because they deem them as too open or dangerous. It's triggered by fears like becoming a victim of crime or of contracting a disease or illness. Its sufferers coop themselves up in their homes where they're comfortable and familiar with their environment. Agoraphobes often become overdependent on other people to compensate for their inability to cope in public. Agoraphobia can develop at any age and can be extremely debilitating. Exposure therapy works effectively against agoraphobia in conjunction with medication. 6. Specific phobia. These are persistent and extreme fears about a specific object or situation and cause a ton of stress to the sufferer. Phobias can be environmental, like acrophobia, the fear of heights, and they can be animal-based or even situational, like taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. Such phobias often arise due to traumatic experiences that cause people to make negative associations with these objects or situations. Someone who was clawed in the face by a cat in their childhood might have an avid fear of cats in their adulthood. In cases where exposure therapy may not be safe or applicable, cognitive behavioral therapy can be effective in changing a person's negative association to their feared object or situation. 7. Obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Yes, OCD and PTSD were categorized by many psychiatrists as disorders to be grouped with the aforementioned anxiety disorders. Recently, there have been new findings about these disorders that deem them both unique enough to be in categories of their own. However, this is not to suggest that OCD and PTSD are any less important to deal with. The common thread that groups disorders like GAD, SAD, panic disorder, and phobias together is that sufferers of these anxiety disorders experience future-oriented fear. OCD differs in that though there is anxiety felt in the sufferer's obsession, they are able to find temporary relief in their ritualistic compulsions. Unfortunately, for OCD sufferers, this means a life of cyclical ritualism that can affect daily living. Those who suffer from PTSD may suffer anxiety-like symptoms similar to GAD or even panic disorder. But PTSD is unique in that it's past-oriented. The sufferer suffers flashbacks that bring them back to the event of their traumatization. If you're diagnosed with anxiety disorder, it's okay. Millions of people around the world understand what it's like to suffer from an anxiety disorder, so you're not alone. Understand that every single one of these anxiety types is often treatable and manageable. Also, if you know someone who may benefit from online counseling, we've partnered up with BetterHelp, an affordable online counseling platform that you can utilize. They're constantly striving to improve their services and terms and conditions. The link will be in the description box.
Here are some factors that may contribute to developing anxiety: traumatic life events, stress from family, work, school, or any other heavy obligations or responsibilities, having a family history of anxiety, or having a history of substance use. But sometimes there's no explanation for experiencing anxiety, and this doesn't mean that it's not real. And beyond this, we know that women, minorities, and people of low income status are at a higher risk of developing anxiety, especially in combination with any of these other factors. Next, let's watch a video about what happens to the brain during anxiety.
We live in a culture that doesn't take mental health issues seriously. There's a lot of stigma. Some people tell you to just suck it up or get it together or to stop worrying or that it's all in your head. But I'm here to tell you that anxiety disorders, they're as real as diabetes. Hi again, it's Dr. Jen, and I've noticed something with my patients. They often describe to me some classic symptoms of an anxiety disorder: constant worry, trouble sleeping, tense muscles, and struggle with concentrating. But they aren't getting treatment. There's a lot of issues with mental health care in this country. Some people don't have insurance that would cover it. Some have been dismissed or minimized in the past and don't think seeking help will do any good. Some worry about the stigma and whether it could affect future jobs or relationships. But severe anxiety isn't a moral or personal failing. It's a health problem, just like strep throat or diabetes. It needs to be treated with the same kind of seriousness. Before we can talk about anxiety disorders, let's talk about anxiety itself. Anxiety is the very real and normal emotion we feel in a stressful situation. It's related to fear, but while fear is a response to an immediate threat that quickly subsides, anxiety is a response to more uncertain threats that tends to last much longer. It's all part of the threat detection system, which all animals have to some degree to help protect us from predators. Anxiety starts in the brain's amygdala, a pair of almond-sized nerve bundles that alert other areas of the brain to be ready for defensive action. Next, the hypothalamus relays the signal, setting off what we call the stress response in our body. Our muscles tense, our breathing and heart rate increase, and our blood pressure rises. Areas in the brainstem kick in and put you in a state of high alertness. This is the fight or flight response. There are ways the fight or flight response is kept somewhat in check, with an area of higher level thinking called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. It works like this. If a person sees something they think is dangerous, like a tiger, that sends a signal to the amygdala saying it's time to run. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex can say to the amygdala, hey look, the tiger's in a cage. You know what a cage is. They can't escape from a cage. It's okay to calm down. It's a feedback loop that can help keep the response in check. The hippocampus is also involved. It provides context, saying things like, hey, we've seen tigers in cages before. We're in a zoo. You are extra safe. With anxiety, these threat detection systems and mechanisms that reduce or inhibit them are functioning incorrectly and cause us to worry about the future and our safety in it. But for many people, it goes into overdrive. They experience persistent, pervasive anxiety that disrupts work, school, and relationships and leads them to avoid situations that may trigger symptoms. Anxiety disorders are not at all uncommon. Based on data from the World Mental Health Survey, researchers estimate that about 16% of individuals currently have or have had an anxiety disorder. These include social anxiety disorder, panic disorder, agoraphobia, and phobias. Studies have shown that people with anxiety disorders don't just have a different way of reacting to stress. There may be actual differences in how their brain is working. One model describes possible mix-ups in the connections between the amygdala and other parts of the brain. The pathways that signal anxiety become stronger, and the more anxiety you have, the stronger the pathways become, and it becomes a vicious cycle. The good news is that there's treatment for anxiety and that you don't have to suffer. Remember, this isn't about weakness, it's about changing brain patterns. And research shows that our brains have the ability to reorganize and form new connections all throughout our lives. A good first step is to do the basics. Eat a balanced diet, exercise regularly, and get plenty of sleep, as your mind is part of your body. It might also help to try meditation. Instead of our heart rate rising and our body tensing, with mindfulness and breathing, we can slow down the fight or flight response and improve how we feel in the moment. Cognitive behavioral therapy, a form of talk therapy, can also be fantastic. In it, you learn to identify upsetting thoughts and determine whether they're realistic. Over time, cognitive behavioral therapy can rebuild those neural pathways that tamp down the anxiety response. Medication can also give relief in both the short term and the long term. In the short term, anti-anxiety drugs can downregulate the threat detection mechanisms that are going into overdrive. Studies have shown that both long-term medications and cognitive behavioral therapy can reduce that overreactivity of the amygdala we see in anxiety disorders. High blood pressure and diabetes, they can be treated or managed over time, and the same is true for an anxiety disorder too.
Now let's talk about some of the medication options we have. These are going to be specific to generalized anxiety disorder, but know that there's many other medications that can help with other types of anxiety disorders. Now keep in mind that it's always best to try therapy first, but therapy plus medications can be even more effective than therapy or medications alone. These are the main classes of medications used in anxiety. The first two, SSRIs and SNRIs, you may remember from the depression module. These are antidepressants, but they really should be called something else because they're not always used for depression, as is the case with anxiety. Let's do a quick refresher on these antidepressants before we talk about the other ones. SSRIs stand for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter or brain chemical that's involved in mood and anxiety. It's often known as the feel-good neurotransmitter, and people who have anxiety or depression often have lower levels of serotonin. Therefore, by increasing the amounts of serotonin, we can help treat anxiety and depression. Before we go any further, let's do a quick refresher on neurotransmitters. This is a picture of two brain cells, also called neurons. The first one is called a presynaptic neuron, and the second one is called a postsynaptic neuron. The gap in between these neurons is the area where neurotransmitters can be passed from the first neuron to the second neuron, and this is in order to communicate and to tell the body how to feel. This gap is known as the synaptic cleft. Neurotransmitters are found in the first neuron in little sacs called vesicles, and in order to tell the body how to feel, they must move from the first neuron to the receptors on the second neuron. The first step is the vesicles move to the edge of the first neuron, and this is where they can release their neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters can then bind to the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. If the neurotransmitters don't bind to the receptors, there's no communication going on between the two cells. After some time, the neurotransmitters that haven't grabbed onto a receptor yet get pulled back up into the first cell using something called a reuptake transporter. Eventually, the neurotransmitters get repacked into those vesicles, leaving very few neurotransmitters left in the synaptic cleft. This means less communication or functions can be carried out. And since serotonin is the neurotransmitter that we're talking about right now, this would mean less of the feel-good chemical goes where it needs to go in order to work. However, let's reset the picture to see what SSRIs do. Just like their name implies, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors block the reuptake transporter. And since serotonin can no longer go back into the first cell, a higher number or concentration of them are left in the synaptic cleft, and therefore more of them can bind to the receptors. Here's the list of all the SSRIs, but the ones in bold are the best ones to use in GAD. But in all honesty, any of them can and are used, except for fluvoxamine, or Luvox. This is only used in OCD. Some of the side effects of SSRIs can be nausea, sexual dysfunction, and weight gain mainly. but not everyone experiences these side effects. One thing that's important to know about SSRIs is that they can take weeks to begin working. Our next class of antidepressants are known as SNRIs, which stands for serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. So we already know that serotonin is the feel-good neurotransmitter. So what is norepinephrine? Norepinephrine is involved in fight or flight, which is how the body reacts to certain situations. So it helps control physical and emotional responses. People with anxiety can sometimes have too much norepinephrine, so it's important to get the right balance. Just like there's reuptake transporters for serotonin, there's also reuptake transporters for norepinephrine. By blocking both of these reuptake transporters, we have more serotonin and norepinephrine left in the synaptic cleft. And because of that, more of these neurotransmitters are able to bind to the receptors and are able to be used by the body and the brain. Here's a list of all the SNRIs. The ones in bold are the best ones to use for GAD, but the other ones are sometimes used as well, especially desvenlafaxine or Pristiq. Some of the side effects of SNRIs can be increased blood pressure and heart rate, nausea, and insomnia mainly. But again, not everyone experiences side effects. One thing I do want to point out with the SSRIs and the SNRIs is that if the dose is increased too quickly, it can worsen anxiety a little bit. So it's best to start with low doses and increase slowly. Benzodiazepines are not antidepressants, but they are often used for anxiety. They work by increasing a neurotransmitter called GABA. GABA is responsible for relaxation and slowing the brain and body down. Although they work fast, benzodiazepines aren't necessarily the best medications, and this is because they can be addicting and because they can actually worsen anxiety in some cases. However, one good reason for using them would be to ease the anxiety while SSRIs or SNRIs are kicking in. If you do take benzodiazepines, it's important to not abruptly stop taking them. And elderly patients should avoid these whenever possible because there's an increased risk of falling since these make you drowsy. The other two medications that are sometimes used are hydroxyzine and buspirone. Hydroxyzine works through histamine. It's fast-acting and it can be taken as needed. Some of the side effects include drowsiness and sleepiness, constipation, and trouble thinking clearly. Buspirone works through serotonin. This one can take weeks to start working, and it cannot be taken as needed like hydroxyzine. Some of these side effects can include nausea, headache, and dizziness.
I felt so overwhelmed by everything. As the day went on, the shaking and sweating got worse. As someone asked me what was wrong, I'd start to cry. I couldn't control it. I went to counseling and saw my physician. After a couple weeks with the medication, I had control again and felt so much relief.
I was always on the edge. I was very jumpy and reactive, and I would lose my breath when I talked to people. After a month with therapy and medication, I felt like I could breathe again. I was able to work on some coping techniques that really helped me feel better.
These are the voices of people who have found medication to be an important part of helping them with anxiety. Everyone has experienced some kind of anxiety. Sometimes it's just worry about what other people might think of you, about personal plans, or the future. Other times it feels more like agitation, irritability, or even sadness. Sometimes anxiety can affect more than just how you think or feel. The physical symptoms of anxiety can be overwhelming and feel hard to control. These include rapid breathing and heart rate, sweating, trembling hands and feet, excessive tearfulness, a lump in the throat, problems with digestion, like feeling sick to your stomach, and a constant headache. They often make anxious feelings worse. The experience can feel so bad that a person can dread it happening again, which only increases the worry and can even result in a panic attack. Cognitive behavioral therapy and medication are both effective treatments for symptoms of anxiety, especially when used at the same time. It's important to know a little about the different kinds of medication for anxiety. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, and serotonin and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, or SNRIs, are the most common and effective medications for both anxiety and depression. SSRI and SNRIs are taken daily, are effective for long-term treatment, and help reduce symptoms such as irritability, agitation, frequent crying, and excessive worry. SSRIs or SNRIs are not addictive and do not result in substance use disorder. Benzodiazepines, commonly known as benzos, are fast-acting medications commonly used to treat significant anxiety symptoms and panic attacks. While effective, these medications can be addictive. They should never be taken in combination with alcohol or opioids, and should only be used as directed by a physician. Safe use of benzodiazepines can be effective for anxiety symptoms, but should only be used in close collaboration with a doctor and as part of a larger wellness plan. Beta blockers are a type of medication usually used for high blood pressure or uneven heartbeat. They can also be effective for short-term reduction of anxiety symptoms related to heart rate, sweating, or shakiness. Some specific prescription antihistamines can also be used in a similar short-term manner. These medications can be used on an as-needed basis, especially when specific situations, like flying, impact someone's life. Each class of medication for anxiety has different benefits and risks, and each can offer relief for anxiety symptoms that get in the way of day-to-day life. Most primary care providers are familiar with these medications, which, in combination with cognitive behavioral therapy, are effective treatments for anxiety disorders. Anxiety symptoms can be overwhelming, but with the right treatment, anxiety can be manageable for almost anyone. Physical symptoms can be reduced, and you can learn positive coping strategies for long-term success. People literally breathe easier and learn to feel hope again.
As with all other disorders, it's not only important to take medications, it's also important to live a healthy lifestyle in order to help support the medications to work. Some healthy lifestyle changes can be therapy, physical activity, having healthy nutritional choices, sleeping 8 hours per night, doing breathing exercises, avoiding substance use, doing meditation and mindfulness, and perhaps yoga as well. Let's watch a video on the power of some of these tips.
You know when you get that ambiguous email from your boss and you start to feel sweaty palms and that empty, freaked out sensation in your stomach? Welcome back, anxiety. Most of us think of anxiety as a bad thing, something to be avoided at all costs. But what if it weren't? What if you could take all of that energy racing around your brain and your body and transform it into something helpful? Global anxiety levels, both the clinical kind and what I call the everyday kind, have increased tremendously in recent years. And many of us are noticing this at work. We might think of anxiety as something that we'd rather just leave on the side of the road if we could. But anxiety is an important tool that arose during our evolution that we use to avoid danger. It's essential for our survival. So how come we don't even feel vaguely protected by it? It's because the volume of our individual and collective anxiety levels has been turned way up too high, and too much of even a potentially good thing like anxiety is bad. So I would like to share 2 powerful science-based tools for turning down the volume on our anxiety and helping us get anxiety back to its helpful, protective state. And both of these tools begin by connecting with our bodies. Tool number 1 is breath work. It's just simple, deep breathing. Slowly inhale and exhale. This can be one of the most immediate ways to calm anxiety because deep breath directly activates the natural de-stressing part of our nervous systems called the parasympathetic nervous system. I recommend a boxed breathing approach, which is inhale deeply on 4 counts, hold at the top for 4 counts, exhale deeply on 4 counts, and hold at the bottom for 4 counts. You can even do this in the middle of any anxiety-provoking conversation, and no one will even know. Lots of people, from ancient monks to modern meditators, have figured this tool out and use it all the time. Tool number 2, moving your body. This one also has immediate positive effects on your mood state, but for a different reason. Every time you move your body, you're releasing a whole bunch of beneficial neurochemicals in your brain. These neurochemicals include dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline, and endorphins, mood and reward boosting neurochemicals that work to both increase positive mood states and decrease negative ones. I like to say that every single time you move your body, it's like giving yourself a wonderful bubble bath of neurochemicals for your brain. So when your boss's email comes in and your heart starts to race, what exactly can you do? If you're in an office, try taking a short walk around the block or even to the supply closet for some sticky notes. If you're working from home, put on 2 of your favorite songs and dance around the living room like no one is watching. Studies have shown that all it takes is 10 minutes of walking to get those mood-boosting effects. But be creative with your movement session, whether that's a quick session of power vacuuming a la Mrs. Doubtfire when you're stressed about a deadline, or doing a set of jumping jacks or getting off the elevator 1 floor early to do a power walk up that last flight of stairs before an important meeting. All of these possibilities will all help your anxiety levels come down. In fact, I tested this effect on my own NYU students. First, I had them take an anxiety assessment before leading them in a movement session that included movements from kickbox and dance and yoga and martial arts together with positive spoken affirmations. Then I had them retake that same anxiety assessment again. What happened? After our movement session, their anxiety scores had decreased to normal levels. Now that's powerful, real-world example that you can use in your life today. So make sure to incorporate these bursts of activity in your day and try one out next time you're feeling stress. It can really make your anxiety feel less all-consuming. Once you connect with your body and turn the volume down on your anxiety, 2 important things will happen. First, when that email comes in, you'll be in a better position to evaluate what about it makes you anxious. Is it that you've taken on too much? Or that you feel insecure about a particular skill set? In other words, you'll be able to use this emotion, anxiety, for exactly what it was evolved to do. Warn you about potential dangers so you can become aware of them and find ways to effectively and creatively address them in your everyday life. Second, once you find the warning signals in your anxiety, you'll be able to communicate with others. You might seek out advice from a trusted colleague when that difficult issue arises. Or you might even have a conversation with your boss about how to prioritize projects. Because you're no longer in fight or flight mode, asking for that support won't feel nearly as threatening. And one of the best gifts of approaching your anxiety in this way is that you will be able to notice those telltale signs of anxiety in everyone else around you, especially those forms of anxiety you're most familiar with. And what will that do? That will allow you to give that person a smile or a kind word to help them through that moment. In other words, your own form of anxiety can boost your personal superpower of empathy. And I can't think of anything we need in this world today more than higher levels of empathy for one another. Your take home in all of this? If you breathe, move, and take note of what your anxiety is signaling, you'll feel more fulfilled, more creative, more connected, and less stressed overall. And that's my wish for every one of us.
That concludes today's video. Thank you everyone for learning about anxiety with me. Have a great day.